everyone, I'm going to be talking to you about negotiation today. This talk is for anybody who's interested in negotiating, both from an employer perspective and also from an employee perspective, specifically around the area of salary. So I'm a veterinarian, also an MBA candidate in sustainable commerce and a project management professional. So I deal with the negotiation quite a lot in my current role as well as in my studies. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about facts about negotiation, the things that you need to know, and also how to get in the right mindset and prepare mentally as you go into your negotiation, what to do in the meeting, my if and or technique and your options for success, as well as self-evaluation afterwards. So we don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to jump right in so that we can get all of the action in here. So here's some really important facts about negotiation. This is our number one. If you don't ask, you're likely not going to get. It is unlikely that your boss, unless they're a real unicorn, is going to come to you and say, you know what, Melanie, I've noticed that you have done an amazing job and I'm just going to give you an enormous raise. And everything that you had in your head that you wanted, I thought of it and here it is. That's very, very unlikely because most people are not mind readers. And second of all, if you don't ask for what you want, then how will they know what it is that you would like to have? So additionally, if you are an employer, this is really important to note that sometimes you're going to have to be a coach for your employees during salary negotiations because this is a big area of mismatch. So it's important to bear in mind that a lot of people are in the mindset that somebody is just going to come along and notice the good work that I'm doing. So I would encourage you to coach your employees to ask for what they want because it will increase your retention. It's been actually shown in research that that being able to voice what you want as an employee and have that be recognized and seen and at least discussed increases retention rates within businesses. So really important tip for employers too. Okay, here's another thing on the gender side. We used to think that women didn't ask for raises, and that was some data from about 4 or 5 years ago. Updated data shows that women actually do ask for raises. It's just that sometimes we're not getting the actual raise as many times as men are. So I'm going to talk specifically a little bit later about some gender-related techniques you can use for success. The other thing I want you to remember is that people who prepare do better than unprepared people. We all know this from surgery. We know this from every aspect of our clinical lives as veterinarians and non-clinical lives. If we are prepared, we do better. We feel more prepared. We feel better going in. We feel better able to respond to questions and answer things. And that's going to be true in negotiation too, particularly if you feel uncomfortable about that topic. Having reviews quarterly is another way that you can prepare. We're going to chat a little bit about that, but I really want you to remember that that's part of preparation. So having those quarterly check-ins, if you're an employer, or more regular if you so choose, and as an employee, are really good ways to ensure that all the way along throughout the year or whatever period you're working at your employers for, that you are aligning yourself with the values and you're doing activities and your employee is doing activities that you think are valuable for the company, and they actually are, so that nobody's getting off track and they're not getting a surprise at the end of the year when somebody says, well, that's really great, Melanie. I'm glad that you did all those things, but I actually didn't want you to do any of them. And I think you've been doing a terrible job. Nobody wants to hear that. And I think it's kind of an unfair thing to hear as an employee. It also is a little bit, it's irresponsible on both parties. So make sure that you are having regular reviews, and that can be very casual. It doesn't have to be anything major, but do sit down and make sure that everybody is doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that they're at least meeting. And if you can give other feedback, those are great opportunities. The final thing I want you to remember with facts about negotiation is that research and pretty well every other part of our life has shown us that negotiation is a skill just like anything else. So just like you were not great at riding a bike the first time, you're probably not great at spaying a dog or at trimming toenails or expressing anal glands or doing any other things that you would do as a veterinarian. You're not going to be awesome at it the first time. and that's okay. It takes practice, and as long as you can acknowledge that, then I think it's a great way to look at it as the same way as any other skill. So let's talk about number 2, which is getting into the right mindset. So I want to remind you that as a member of the veterinary team, whether you're a technician or a veterinarian or any other member of the vet team, you probably have great foundational negotiation skills. If you're a parent and you've negotiated with a toddler, if you've negotiated with a family member, or even if you've talked to a friend about where you're going to be meeting for dinner, those are all negotiation skills. Never mind the compliance stuff that we get into with veterinary medicine, where we're asking clients to do things that are often kind of challenging for them, like medicating their cats, or if we're in non-clinical roles, in asking people to comply with regulations that are very challenging. We do those negotiations all the time, and so you're probably quite adept at it. However, there is probably, if you feel uncomfortable with negotiating about salary, there's something different about that for you. And for a lot of people, that's an attitude about money. So I would like you to pause the video for a couple minutes and just think about things that you might have heard growing up. Grab a pen and a pencil. Don't skip out on this part. It doesn't take long and it doesn't require a lot of deep thought, but it's really important. Think of a couple phrases that you might have heard about money growing up in your house. So maybe that was, oh, don't ask about that. That's not polite. That's not polite to ask about that. Or maybe your household was very open about talking about money. Were you encouraged to have a budget when you were younger? Did your parents teach you about talking, and did they talk openly about money and the ways that you could obtain money and the ways to negotiate? Did they coach you on skills about negotiation? Or was it polite or impolite? What about haggling? Did you ever see your family of origin, the people you grew up with, did you ever see them haggling or negotiating a price for anything? Or was it that you would pay the money that was asked and that's it? And did you see people get uncomfortable about talking about money? I think those are really important things to remember. So if you can just think of 1 or 2 phrases that you might have heard about growing up, it'll probably give you a really good idea of how you might feel about negotiating about salary and what some of your feelings might be about them. So do take a second, write those down. I'm going to assume that you have. And what I'd like for you to do when you're preparing for a negotiation is to keep those in mind. And it's important to acknowledge those feelings and the way that you were brought up and recognize that that's okay. That's the information that I had when I was growing up. Now I have to behave in a different way so that I can succeed in my workplace. I can still do things differently and adhere to my core values that I was brought up with, and I can still be a polite and empathetic human being while asking for what I need. So I want you to think about that phrase, that acknowledgement of how you were taught things about money and negotiating when you were growing up, and acknowledge that it's okay to try new things and you can still adhere to your core values that make you a good, kind, empathetic person while asking for what you want. So think about that and bear that in mind. The next thing that I want you to do is to get your facts straight. It is really important to go into any negotiation about salary when you are, whether you are an employer or an employee, with some data. We wouldn't go into a consult with a client, nor would we go into any kind of negotiation in another scenario with no data and just shoot from the hip. That'd be really irresponsible, and it'd be quite likely you'd get really caught out with, in case your opponent or your person who you're negotiating with has a different viewpoint or they have more data than you. So do make sure that you have some information. And what I recommend is developing a kind of a core group of people who are interested in sharing that kind of information with each other. So maybe those are colleagues that work together with you, or maybe those are colleagues that work at different practices, or they're people who you went to school with. Just have a circle of people that you could call upon, and you don't have to ask them their exact salary, but you could ask, hey, you could frame it as, I'm going into a negotiation and I'm not really sure how much I should ask for. I wonder if I can know your salary range, because we have a similar level of experience and or where things might differ, and if you have any information about that, and I'd be happy to share mine as well. So those are really good things it's just really great to have a circle, even if it's just one or two people, so that you can trade ideas on that. Another thing that you can use to gather data, you can use, sometimes your local VMA, your state or provincial VMAs will have some kind of a fee and salary guide, or you can look on AVMA, as they do have some information about that. There's also information on Glassdoor if you're looking for a corporate situation, or I would strongly encourage you again to call somebody up who is in an analogous position, and try to get to know them. And we'll talk a little bit about, that's part of networking, and that's going to be a big focus. It's going to be a big focus for the next couple of days within the conference, is getting to know how to network really, really well, so that you can talk about, hey, what does salary range look like for this type of position in your company? So that you can, and I think there's nothing wrong with having those conversations, and it's really, really helpful to you so that you can get an idea. If you're in academia, oftentimes the positions are unionized and they will have a salary range so that you can take a look at. And oftentimes if you're in government, they will have some information online as well about what the salary ranges are. So make sure that you have your facts straight. I would also recommend practicing on a willing subject. This can honestly be just about anybody who is going to be empathetic and kind to you, and who's going to listen carefully to what you say, and afterwards potentially play devil's advocate with you. So, I wonder about that, what you're saying there. If I was the employer, I might think this. Could you justify that a bit more? So those are some tips to keep in mind as far as getting a willing subject. The other thing you can do, if you really don't have anybody to practice on, is just use your phone and record yourself. It's painful, of course, to watch yourself back, but it's really valuable, really, really important to note where there are points where you might be getting flustered, or where you might be losing steam or feeling, and you'll notice your expressions on your face as well. So really important to practice, at least do a little role play beforehand so that you have an idea and you're not tripping over your words. Preparing yourself mentally, there's another component to that. So we've talked about gathering data, we talked about having a circle of colleagues who you can talk to, as well as doing some role play and practicing how you're going to ask for things. The other thing I'd like for you to do is to get in the right mindset. So the other component to that is calming your brain down. We know that particularly if you find negotiation about salary stressful, it can be hard to not to get your brain really fired up and become very emotional about the scenario, particularly if things start to go a different way than you had planned or you hadn't foreseen the outcome. So some things that you can do to prepare and get your brain as calm as possible would be to, one, visualize who it is that you are negotiating on behalf of. We know this is particularly important for women. Men seem to be able to really negotiate well for themselves, and it doesn't come at a penalty for them. But for women, some research suggests that that being able to negotiate on behalf of someone else is a real skill that a lot of women bring to the workplace. And furthermore, even if they're visualizing who they're negotiating for, that really comes through in the way that they speak about things, and they're much more able to ask for what they want and need. I'm certainly not suggesting that all women are like that, but this is what some of the research is telling us. So it is a technique that you can think of. You don't necessarily have to say, I'm negotiating for, to get, so that my kids can have a better future, or so that I can pay off my house or my loans, or so that I can do these extracurriculars for my kids or my spouse. But it helps to keep that in your mind about why it is that you're asking, particularly if you have hang-ups about money, because it seems to be for whatever reason, it's much harder to negotiate for oneself if you have a hang up about money. So if you can think about negotiating for the other people that you have to take care of, that's really important. If you can set the meeting at a time that is mutually calm for both of you. So think about whether or not you would like to meet at a time at the end of the day. Is that better for you, or is it better to meet at the beginning of the day when you're first getting into work, lunch break, or is it better to meet on a day when you don't have a lot scheduled? This is true for employer and employee, and really important to keep in mind because you want to have the best outcome for both of you. The next thing I really would like for you to think about when you're negotiating is calming your brain down in advance. This is again part of this mindset thing. Research has shown us that people who have a reduced amount of stress in their brain and their life before going into a negotiation do so much better than people who are already ramped up and already emotional and already thinking about stressful and difficult scenarios in their life. So one thing that I think is very, very helpful and is backed by research is doing a very short meditation in advance, or at least just sitting quietly. I really love the podcast Meditation Minis. It's on iTunes, available everywhere to everyone for free. They're 5 minutes or less, and they are awesome for just calming your brain down. There's one called I Am Enough, and that is very, very good, particularly when you're going into a negotiation. Other things that you can do would be to engage in physical activity within 24 hours of your negotiation so that again, your brain has had a chance to calm down. We know that reduces stress. We also know that physical activity or a hobby, so something that engages your brain in a way that you don't usually engage it through your work, is really helpful to reduce stress levels and reduce your arousal of your amygdala, so that animal brain at the back, which is what we really want to avoid during a negotiation. We want to be calm, and we want to be present, and we want to be able to bring our full selves without feeling big emotions at the time. And having had some practice will also help you be prepared. So bringing your data, making sure you've practiced, making sure you had some role play exercises with some other individuals or on your phone with your camera, whatever works for you. Now we're going to move on to what to do in the meeting. So you've prepared, you've got everything, you've got your mindset all ready, you're good to go. So you get into the meeting. Now what do you do? So for me as an employer, I really enjoy it when the employee takes the lead and they can share with me what they like to, what they've been doing and where they feel they've brought value. And I would encourage you as an employee to do that, and as an employer to encourage your employee to do that, so that they're kind of controlling the flow and the rate of it, and you can interject and add in as needed. So here's my suggested flow for negotiation meetings and for annual review type things. Share what you love about the workplace and why it is that you enjoy working there, and then what you have done in the past year to bring that along. So things like any of additional things that you might have done that are extra or that have really brought something wonderful to the table for your employer. And if possible, if you can have an idea of how much value that might have brought in a dollar figure. So for example, if I found a new answering service for our clinic and that saved us $10,000 this year, great. I would bring that up at my review and say, here's one thing that I did that I thought was really valuable. I spearheaded this recycling campaign and it led to 3 news articles, and I don't know exactly how many new clients that brought in, but it was sure a lot of great PR for our clinic. I spearheaded the Wellness at Work campaign, and I did 5 activities that really, we had 3 less employees that left this year. I can't entirely take credit for that, but in looking on Google, retention rates, and retaining more employees is worth this much money. So if you can have some idea of those and bring them to the table too, and add, have them at the ready, those are helpful to be able to share what value you've actually brought to the table and what that have aligned and brought value to your employer. Then I would get confirmation that your employer agrees that you have contributed something valuable. I would do this before you ask for anything else. You can use phrases like, hey, I saw you nodding a lot when I was talking about this. Do you agree that about the contributions that I've made to the workplace and the value that it's brought? So make sure you get that confirmation, and you can have a little discussion back and forth at that point, whether or not they, what they felt was valuable and whether or not they agree with what you've brought forward. That don't let that derail you though from asking for what you want. So let's say your employer says, well, actually, I'm going to question you on that. I don't know that it really saved us $10,000. Do make sure that you have that discussion, but make sure that you move forward with your ask, because there's surely some things in there that they felt were valuable that you did. And so what you can say when you move into your ask is, so now we've agreed on what I did contribute to the workplace this year. I'd like to ask for this. You can say things like, I've researched my salary and compared with other similar roles with experience and geographic areas. And based on this and all the value that you agreed that I bring, I'd like to ask for what you want. Then, this is the most important part, stop talking. I want you to try to be really comfortable with being silent while your employer processes what you've asked for and is hopefully able to provide you with a response. One of the biggest mistakes we make, particularly women in negotiations, we jump in and we try to fill that void of silence with something else, or we backtrack and we completely undo all the good work that we've done. So instead of sitting there and trying to verbalize what it is that, and trying to and backtracking and filling that silence, I'd like you to take some deep breaths. And if you can, I'd like you to roll your shoulders back, smile and engage and make eye contact while they're thinking. And stop your mind, your internal monologue from saying things like, oh my gosh, they think you're an idiot. They don't want you to, they don't value me. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And jumping to conclusions. What I'd really like for you to do is to just take a moment to pause, because just like when we say to a client or we say to somebody, hey, your animal needs this surgery, it's going to cost this much money, and they take a breath and they're trying to think they're often not trying to think, oh my God, how am I going to get out of this silly veterinarian's office? I don't want to do this. They're often thinking, okay, can I put this on my credit card, or can I put this on my line of credit, or do I have the cash in my account right now? Or they may be thinking, or how am I going to get this to work with my, with getting the dog in here next Tuesday? These are all things that might be going, you might be inventing a monologue in your head, and I want you to actively stop doing that. Take a deep breath, roll your shoulders back, engage and maintain eye contact, smile, and just wait for them to respond. Now, if the response is not what you are expecting it to be, then there are some options. I'm going to give you my if and or technique so that you can use those for success. So before you go into your negotiation, I want you to think of some if things or either or things that you could trade in if your boss says, you know what, it's COVID-19 and there's no way that I can pay you this much, or Melanie, that we've had such a terrible year. There's no way I could give you even a 0.5% raise. So then I want you to take a deep breath, and I want you to have something in your back pocket that would also be valuable to you that may not be monetary. So you could say something like, given that we agreed that I did provide value, could we negotiate a different type of compensation to recognize the things that I did bring to the clinic? So those things could be additional vacation, a one-time bonus. It could be more CE money or more CE time, for example. And I would encourage you to throw out maybe one of them and say, would that work for you? Or maybe they will come back. Maybe your employer will come back with something that they could offer you instead. The other thing you can say is that a firm answer? Or is there any wiggle room in there? Is there any wiggle room in there at all, given the value I've brought to the practice and that I continually bring? And finally, if there is no wiggle room and there's absolutely no way that they could pay you any more or give you any other non-monetary recognition, you could say, I understand your position. What would be helpful would be what I should start doing and what I should stop doing so that I can get to the place where I can get that raise or that recognition that I would really like. And when could we meet again to reassess? So don't leave it as a closed door. Leave the door open a crack and ask for some feedback, even though it might be hard to hear, and even though it might be challenging. And see when you can reassess that, because maybe there's a way that you could change some things in the next 3 months and meet again, and then the outcome might be totally different. Finally, I want to make sure that you do a summary in writing. Always do this if you're the employer. Generally this is your job, but if you're an employee and your employer doesn't do this, please make sure that you summarize this in writing, whether it's an email or a little document, and send it to them and say, this is what I heard, is this right? Just so you have that and it's on your record, and at least you have it. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is self-evaluation. Recognize that you might not be perfect every single time. You might want to ask for feedback on how you did. And this is an ongoing, iterative, living process. Just in the same way that you're not going to be perfect at every procedure and every communication interaction that you ever have with clients or with coworkers or family or whatever, you may not be perfect at negotiation every time. Depends on what might be going on in your day, or you might have just felt really ramped up or something, or triggered by something, and that is okay. There is always more room for negotiation, and that is totally fine. Take some time to calm down after negotiating, because everybody will feel a little bit, regardless of our best efforts, almost everyone will feel a bit ramped up. So come down after that high or low, and after about 48 hours, I'd recommend writing down what you thought you did well, what you thought you could do different next time. And if you want to, if it feels right to you, then you can solicit feedback from your employer about what you could have done differently in that scenario to have success. Depends on your relationship with your employer, and as an employee, as an employer, if you felt like you didn't do a great job with your employees' negotiation or review, then I think that'd be incredibly courageous and wonderful to ask them. So just to recap, we went through quite a lot of stuff here, but we talked about facts about negotiation. Remember that if you don't ask, you won't get. Remember to be prepared. Getting in the right mindset. So remember to calm your brain down and get prepared. Bring your data, calm yourself down using meditation, physical activity, hobbies, whatever that is. What to do in the meeting. Remember to control the flow and drive the meeting if you're the employee. And then our steps to do the if and or technique for success, and then self-evaluation afterwards. Thank you guys very, very much. If you want to see me afterwards, please message me, or you can also find me at Instagram at the DVM Project, or on Facebook and Twitter at the same handle. Thanks, and have a great day.